Well, these scriptures are rich as can be, but at the same time, maybe not confusing, but throw a few curves at us. For example, this coming Thursday is Ascension Thursday, and we celebrate that after the death and the resurrection, after a certain time, Jesus ascended to the Father, and then 10 days later, the day we call Pentecost, which the word means 50, so that was 50 days after Easter, God sent His Holy Spirit upon the early church and inflamed it with love and faith, and then they went out and the gospel and the church began to grow and spread to everyone. Well, that's what we celebrate. That's the quick and easy one. However, in I think the 70s, the Pope told the bishops of the world at each of the conferences, you can decide when you're going to celebrate Ascension Thursday. And you can either celebrate on Thursday, 10 days before Pentecost, or you can move that to the Sunday following, which is the seventh Sunday of Easter. And now it's only 7 days or an octave before Pentecost. And the reason was this, and as a priest I felt this strongly. How many here remember the expression holy days of obligation? And on the holy days of obligation, what did you have to do? You had to go to Mass. I think there were 6 of them, and Ascension Thursday was one of them. So the church would gather for Mass on the Holy Thursday, only about a third of the church, because the rest was busy working or whatever, or forgot. And in fact, a priest, a friend of mine in the early days, used to call it a holy day of inconvenience, because it was very inconvenient to get to these holy days, although there were only 6. Now, the church said, if you want, you can move that Mass from Thursday to Sunday so that the whole church experiences this great feast of the Ascension. Because it's part of the great Easter mystery. On Good Friday, Jesus died. On Easter Sunday, He rose. On whatever day He ascended, and then finally sent the Spirit on Pentecost. Now, even the idea of the Ascension is a little, not confusing, but in all of the Gospels, I assume that the Ascension was figured to be many days after the resurrection. But in John's Gospel only, it appears that the Ascension happened on Easter Sunday. And the reason is because in John's Gospel, you'll remember that Mary Magdalene went to the tomb to bring flowers or whatever to decorate the tomb, just like we do at gravesides all over in every cemetery. And when she got there, the stone was rolled back, and she was in shock. She checked in, and there was an angel or a man or somebody in there said, He's not here. He has arisen or whatever. And she walked out confused, and she ran into Jesus, but she thought He was the gardener. And she looked right at Him, didn't recognize Him. And that's typical, all the appearance stories after Easter. Nobody recognized Jesus, His voice, nothing. And she says to Him, the Gospel says, thinking He was the gardener, do you know where they have laid the body of my Lord? And He said to her, Mary. And once He spoke her name, suddenly the lights went on and she realized it was Jesus. So she fell down and began to kiss His feet or whatever to give Him homage. And He says these words in John's Gospel, do not touch me yet. I have not yet returned to the Father. So, since in all the Gospels He appeared to the disciples in the upper room on Easter night, then it would suggest that somehow He rapidly went to the Father in heaven and then came back and appeared to the disciples. So with all of that confusion, I'll confuse you some more, okay? Because these readings, they don't address the chronology of what happened and when it happened. The earliest thing that happened is the Gospel. This Gospel is written, chapter 14, it's even before the death. These words that Jesus speaks only in John's Gospel happened before His death. Then the second reading, or the first reading from the Acts of the Apostles happened about 30 years after the death and resurrection. And the book was written, well, it was actually taking place immediately after. All of the Acts of the Apostles were recorded in this book about 30 years after Jesus had died and risen. And the second reading is probably written around 110, the last one. And it was written during the persecution, and quite frankly, it's very not understandable because it's all encoded and symbolic language. For example, the word 12 appears 3 times in this reading, okay? And it also is implied in the names that were inscribed, and there were 3 gates facing east, 3 north, 3 south, 3 west, 3, 3, 3, 3 equals 12. So 12 comes up 4 times in this reading. What on earth is it referring to? The 12 apostles. The 12 new stone foundations of the church, just like the 12 tribes of Israel. It's, important but not important. It's just very symbolic, and some people read it and they're trying to figure out what it means, and is all of this going to happen because it's talking about the future, and it's not meant to be that. It's meant to be a book of encouragement. Having said all of that, we look at this gospel. Now, I'm going to give you some homework. You don't have to do it. I'm not going to grade you, although I have powers that you know not of, and I can figure out who did it or not. But in that website, I constantly give you usccb.org, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, usccb.org. You can go onto that site. It's the bishop's site for this country. Punch it on in your website there, and it'll pop up. And you can go to it and get the daily readings, the readings for every day of the Mass during the year. But also you can touch on the one that says the Bible, and it will give you the whole Bible, all of the chapters and verses of the entire Bible with footnotes. And if you go in there to chapter 14 of John, you'll see that this happened, it's almost 30 chapters in John, and that's when Jesus died at the second to the last chapter. So we're here way before even the death of the Lord, let alone his ascension, although that may have been on the same day as Easter, maybe, in John. So the chronology is all over the place. But here's what I think is important. John is saying, and this could apply in both places before his death because he left them at his death, and certainly when he's hanging on the cross and dying and then he finally dies, if they were there, and only John, in John's gospel only, is there at the foot of the cross talking to Jesus just before he dies. But when he died, if John had looked up and said, Jesus, Jesus, are you there still? Jesus wouldn't have answered. He was dead. So he left them. And when they went to that upper room, not knowing that he had risen, they were miserable. They were in grief. They were afraid for their lives because they were followers of Jesus. And they were in that upper room, and he had left them. And they must have felt, Jesus, how could you do this to us? How could you leave us? But he had. But after he had risen, and before he ascended to the Father, these same words could have been said then. I'm going back to the Father. You should be filled with joy. I'm returning to the Father, but I will come back again to you. Now, of all the people in the upper room, the people at the foot of the cross, even the apostles going out and preaching during the Acts of the Apostles, of all of them, we are the luckiest, I think. 2,000 years later, what in the heck are all of these people here at 2,000 years later after Jesus died and rose? Because we know all of these scriptures. We've been given all of these testimonies, even what people standing at the foot of the cross couldn't understand. In fact, they must have been shocked. Imagine Jesus after he had been arrested, he had been tried, stripped, beaten, they spit in his face, they put a crown of thorns in his head, they made him carry the cross, and then they nailed him to it, lifted him up there half nude, and dropping all of his blood until he died. Imagine standing there watching this and hearing in the crowd, maybe you would have been, maybe not one of them, shouting at him, laughing at him, mocking him, and then he dies. But just before he dies, he says these words, Father, forgive them all. They know not what they do. Now, just for a moment, I'm going to ask you a question, but don't raise your hand, please. I'm not trying to get a confession out of anyone, but I have powers you know not of anyway. But I'm going to ask this question. How many, don't raise your hand, out there still, the sun, have a grudge against somebody who has hurt them? They said something, they did something. I say, weren't you and this person best friends? Not anymore. I say, what happened? You won't believe what they said or what they did to me. How many, don't raise your hand, have one of those inside, if not more than one? And Jesus should have had plenty of that inside as he's dying on the cross with nails through his hands and feet, bleeding to death. And instead, what does he do? Does he hate? He asked the Father to forgive everybody who was killing him. He loved and forgave. And for me, I tell you all the time, that I think was his most divine minutes in time, his most divine moment. He could love in the face of such hatred. And the point of it all is, love is the thing that counts. That's what he's asking here today. If you loved me, you would keep my commandments, and let my love live in you, and let the Father's love live in you. I want to remain in you, remain in me. And if you keep my commandments, if you follow my example, if you love like I have loved you, you will get it. Because I'll tell you, hate is powerful, but love is more powerful. Hate can bring people to death. Love can bring us out of a dead spirit. Love can bring us back to life. And so today, as we approach this great feast of Pentecost, when the Spirit will be poured all over us again, we, 2,000 years later, we understand that. And no wonder our churches are full and we have over 1 billion Catholics in the world, because we really believe in Pentecost. We really believe that Jesus had to ascend to the Father precisely so that through the power of the Father and the Son, the Spirit could be poured upon us. And that is what enlivened the church in the early days and enlivens us still today. And so Nicholas